Hey YouTube, it's Pastor Dwayne here. So today I want to take a look at a previous video that I did on Scrivener and the Textus Receptus. And in this video I said, so the 1881 text of the Textus Receptus has actually been sort of, I don't want to say back-translated, but you could almost say back-translated from the King James Version. Now that phrase I think caused a little bit of confusion, so I want to dive in a little bit with what Scrivener did with the Greek New Testament and clarify my position on that specific idea, the back translation of the Greek New Testament from the King James Version. So let me clarify here. Let me just come right out and just say it, okay? I do not believe that Scrivener back translated the Greek New Testament from the King James Version in order to produce his edition of the Textus Receptus. Okay, if you go back to that video, take a look at it, okay, you'll see that I described the process in which Scrivener went through and produced the Greek New Testament, and you can take a look at that and you'll see that there was no description of back translation going on. So I just want to clarify really quickly right now before we dive in that I don't believe that he back translated the Greek New Testament. Rather, I think a better way to describe what Scrivener did would be to call it reverse engineering. And we're going to dive into a little bit about that. Okay, so my reference to the term back translated in that video was simply to appeal to a wider audience who would have understood that phrase better than what I was putting in the video about reverse engineering. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that the Scrivener text was reverse engineered aside from that video I produced. So that was my reasoning for using the term. It's just widely known. People have a general idea of what that is, but there are some nuances there, and I want to dive into that in this video. So in order to understand this a little better, we need to know a little bit about the context surrounding Scrivener's work on the Textus Receptus. Okay, he didn't produce it in a vacuum. He just didn't wake up one day and was like, I'm bored. I think I'm going to do some work on the Textus Receptus. To be honest, I don't know if that happens a whole lot in the textual critical community. But then again, maybe they are a strange bunch of people. So in the previous video, right, link in the description, go check it out once you're done here. But in that video, I expressed how Scrivener was actually set on a mission from the Convocation of Canterbury. The Church of England was tasked with the idea of updating the King James Version. And so when the update was completed, it of course became known as the Revised Version. Later on in the 1900s, early 1900s, came over to the States, became the American Standard Version. So that's, it's a direct lineage from the King James Version. But that was sort of the context surrounding why Scrivener had to go about doing that. So after Scrivener was tasked with this, one of the specific things that the convocation was looking for was to have all the differences between the original text of the Revised Version and the original text of the King James Version noted in the margins. Just taking a brief look at the preface, you can read that where it's recounted in there. When the text adopted differs from that from which the Authorized version was made, the alterations be indicated in the margins. So that's the request, and that's what was being done here. Now, the big issue with this was twofold. There were two issues to overcome. The first issue was, according to the revisers, the differences appeared to be too many, as they would often crowd and obscure the margins of the Revised Version. Put simply, there are just too many differences between the Textus Receptus and the text underlining the Revised Version to put it in the margins. It would just make it absolutely cluttered, unreadable, hard to use. Like you picture the Nestle Aland apparatus and try putting that in the margin, right? It just isn't going to work. It's not fathomable. But that was one of the issues. That's not the one we're looking at. The second issue was more important, right? This is the one we're discussing here. Okay, and it's that according to those involved, right, the Authorized version was not a translation of any one Greek text then in existence. Again, that's from the preface to Scrivener's 1881 edition. I think it's like the 1904 Cambridge edition, actually, or the 1904 printing by Cambridge. It was also noted in the text that Beza's 1598 text was quote, more likely than any other to be in the hands of the King James revisers. The second issue here is that we don't know of a single Greek text that was used. In fact, we know that it was multiple and there were other things involved. So it was the response to this second issue that Scrivener's work would seek to remedy. He would try to fix that. He would try to pin down what the original Greek text was underlying the King James Version. And so what he did is he compared Beza's 1598 edition of the TR to the King James Version and noted where the King James Version moved away from it. In fact, here, I believe Scrivener had indicated that there were 190 deviations in the New Testament from the King James to the text of Theodore Beza. So what he did then is he took those 190 variant readings and compared them with other print editions of the Greek New Testament, and then he would use those to come up with what became Scrivener's Greek New Testament. I want to note this again from the preface of Scrivener's Greek New Testament. It says, "Wherever therefore the authorized renderings agree with other Greek readings, which might naturally be known through printed editions to the revisers of 1611 or their predecessors, Beza's reading has been displaced from the text in favor of the more truly representative reading." So in other words, okay, Scrivener used Beza's edition as his based text, but made change it to it when it varied from the King James Version. So those changes were added in and based on other printed editions rather than his own translation work. So this is really what the crux of the discussion is, right? Is it back translated or is it what I call reverse engineered? Now this to me sounds like reverse engineered, but what I wanted to do is take us on a little thought experiment and just see if we can kind of gauge how it would look if Scrivener back translated versus how it would look if he was reverse engineering. So based on the previous explanation of all the back translated stuff, it would be forgivable if someone were to confuse the difference between reverse engineered and back translated. Okay. So to understand the difference, I think it would be good to imagine how Scrivener's process would change depending on whether we perceive his work as either translated from the King James Version or reverse engineered. Okay. So I want you to picture this with me. Let's use our imaginations. Just picture this. Picture with me. So you got Scrivener sitting at his desk, no computer, no fancy lights, just a low light flickering from the candle while he pulls off his King James Version from the shelf and puts it on his desk. And he grabs his Beza 1598 edition and puts it down beside. And then he begins looking through the text. So he finds himself reading through, and he doesn't get too far when he notices Matthew chapter 1, verse 23. "Behold, a virgin shall be with child and shall bring forth a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel," which is being interpreted God with us. Okay, so this is different from Beza's edition. So Scrivener notices that this is different from Beza's edition. See, the King James Version says they shall call, but Beza's text has the Greek, which seems to say you shall call. So the King James Version is third person, they shall call, and Beza's text seems to show us a second person singular, you shall call. Okay, so there's a little bit of a difference there between the Greek text of Beza and the King James Version. So this brings us to the critical part of our discussion. What did FHA Scrivener actually do in this scenario? Okay, there's two options that I presented. Remember, he either back translated or he reverse engineered. Now, I know some of you might take an issue with reverse engineered, but I'm sticking to my guns on this one because I think it's very clear that he reverse engineered the Textus Receptus. So if he back translated, let's go back to Scrivener sitting at his desk with a dimly lit candle there. He's poring over his books, looking at this difference, and he's contemplating in his head what Greek phrase might actually fit they shall call, right? Because that's what's in the King James Version. And so if he were back translating, maybe he pulls a few grammars off the shelf, maybe he pulls a few lexicons, takes a look, what would fit best with they shall call? So he does all this work. He thinks up his head. He goes, I know Greek and I know English, and this is what I'm going to put. I am going to put kalasis in there. I am going to make it kalasis because that's the English and that's the word that I should put there because that word better represents what the King James Version has. That's not really what happened. Okay, let's go back and take a look at what would happen. Now, if he reverse engineered, here's what he would do. He'd come across the difference. Matthew 1, verse 23, "Behold, the virgin shall be with child and bear a son, they shall call." And he would look at it. And instead of saying, what works best here? What can I best come up with to match this? So what he likely did at this point is he would have pulled off his Erasmus Greek New Testament, his Stephanus Greek New Testament, his Elsevier New Testament, and he would have opened those all up to Matthew chapter 1, verse 23, and he would see, oh, these editions, they have the reading that was used by the King James Version. So I'm going to take it from these editions and put it into my edition. The important nuance to realize here is that when the readings were changed in Beza's edition to match the King James Version, it was always a reading that was used from another edition of the Textus Receptus. And using the King James Version, he determined where those differences were in order to make the changes to Beza's text. This is why Scrivener's text came in. As I mentioned before, there was about 190 differences between Beza's Greek New Testament and the King James Version translation. And so there were about 190 places, I'm presuming, where Scrivener had to seek out the reading from another printed edition. But again, another look at the preface will indicate that Scrivener decided to use only Greek editions. He didn't go back to the Vulgate in order to do the reverse engineering work for his printed edition. Anyway, so all of that to just kind of clarify my stance. I know I have seen a few other people take that video and use it to suggest that I meant something that I, didn't really mean. I don't actually believe that Scrivener's text is back-translated, but by using the text of the King James Version, I would say that Scrivener was able to reverse engineer what that supposed underlying text might have been. So that was really what Scrivener was doing there. And I think for the sake of many others, even in the sense I used it in the last video, I'm not going to take the video down. Okay, it's a good video. Go watch it. It's a good video. I'll probably stop using the term back-translated. Well, brothers and sisters, I hope you found this video insightful and useful. If you did, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, we'll see you around.